So this is part 2 of managing conflict and power. So let's get back into different ways that we handle conflict, which are avoidance, accommodation, competition, reactivity, and collaboration. Now your textbook does not mention compromise, also known as negotiation necessarily, but we'll mention that as well. So avoidance. This is when we ignore the conflict. Sometimes that can be, I don't want to actually have to deal with the conflict, so I'm just going to pretend like it doesn't exist. Sometimes it's we really don't even realize we have conflict, and so we're ignoring the actual issues that everybody else notices are actually a part of the conflict. Now, given the nature that you're avoiding actually dealing with the conflict head on, it is a we-lose situation. You lose because you're not addressing your needs or your wants, and the other person loses because they don't have the opportunity to address your needs and wants, or even their own needs and wants. Now, avoidance is known as a passive approach, as opposed to a more active approach. Keep in mind that if you always avoid conflict, it can lead to what I like to call cumulative annoyance. What does that mean? That bit by bit by bit by bit by bit, you just avoid and avoid and avoid. You become more annoyed and annoyed and annoyed until eventually over time you explode. Now also be mindful that sometimes people who tend to avoid can have pseudo conflict. They either build something up in their head or they think conflict is there when there's actually no conflict that the other person even notices. And when they actually talk it out, they realize, oh, I didn't even have a problem with this other person. I just had a conflict in my own head. So here's an example of avoidance in action. I had a student who really wanted to go to Disney World. She and her husband were doing a road trip to Florida. They were coming back towards Arkansas, and he was like, hey, honey, I'm so sorry. We cannot stop and go to Disney World. She said, okay. Week 1 passes. He notices that she's a little annoyed, and she says, no, I'm fine. I'm good. Week 2. Still noticing her different behavior, and no, I'm fine. I'm good. Everything's fine. Week 3. He says, honey, what is going on? And she finally lets him know, I'm really upset that we did not go to Disney World. So you can see how until she actually addressed the issue, it was a we-lose situation. Then there's accommodation. This is where one person's needs get met, or maybe their wants get met, but the other person does not. So this is what I like to call the I lose, you win. That in some way, you're giving up what you want in order to help the other person get what they want. There are different reasons why we accommodate. Sometimes that's based on a power differential. For example, your boss. They really want you to work on a project. You don't want to work on that project, but you know they have a lot of influence and sway over you getting a new promotion that's coming up next week. So you do it. You lost, and they won, thanks to the power differential. Sometimes it can be affected by love. Sometimes you just really want to see the other person happy, so much so that you give up and you're just like, whatever you want to do, honey, I'm really fine with it. So, for example, there's a student and she and her husband were shopping online. And this is something they do to dream of what they can finally afford and buy when they have a little extra money around. And she would put things in the cart, and he would put things in the cart. She would put things in the cart, he would put things in the cart. And she mentioned that he would every now and then buy some of the things that she wanted in the cart. That he acknowledged for her that it was so much better just to see her happy to get those things that she wanted. In that case, he accommodated. Now keep in mind that if you always accommodate on even the big things that you really want, that can also lead to cumulative annoyance. But if you don't really care, if you don't care if one person goes wants McDonald's and you want Burger King, but you're just really, really hungry, you're like, hey, let's just go to McDonald's if that's what you want, that's perfectly fine. Just know when it's best to accommodate. Now, usually accommodators can have their opposition in those who like to compete. Competitors are people who like to get their needs met, but don't really let others get their needs met. So this is a I win, you lose situation. Be aware that this can lead to defensive communication, either from you or from the other person involved. Also, competition is going to promote escalation. For example, I had one student who said, Miss Armstrong, I'm so excited that Christmas is coming up because my boyfriend is going to buy me a $200 purse. I said, oh, does he realize he's going to buy you a $200 purse? And she said, yes, I told him to. I said, oh, but what if he wants to buy you something else, something that maybe comes from him? No, he's supposed to do exactly what I tell him. That's what good boyfriends do. And I said, okay, well, what if he doesn't buy you the purse? Her response, we'll break up. In a relationship like that, where there is someone who is a competitor, and yes, she actually took the Styles questionnaire and scored highest in competing, yeah, there can be an escalation of emotions and even more conflict. Sometimes it can lead to reactivity. Now, reactivity is usually just emotionally explosive. You don't think, you just react. There's no way to manage your emotions, no way to think about how you are going to actually involve yourself in the conflict. You just react. And because of that, there's really no end in sight. This may be where you have that lack of respect, where you call people out of their names. Things get heated very quickly here. Traditionally, what we think of as the best form of communication is collaboration. Now, you've probably heard somewhere along the lines that compromise is best. Well, compromise is a we draw. No one really wins, no one really loses. That you get part of what you want, and I get part of what I want, but neither one of you actually get fully what you want. With collaboration, it is a we win, because through mutual problem solving, you both get what you want. Now, actually addressing the issues and going through and mutually problem solving is going to be a more assertive style than avoidance and accommodation, which are seen as more passive. But not aggressive or overly so, as we see in competition and reactivity. Now, because collaboration is a newer process for more people, I always explain how you can collaborate in your everyday life. First, make sure that you attack the problem and not the people involved. Now, this can sometimes be easier said than done. Usually when emotions are high, we feel a need to attack the other person. And if we attack the other person, get them where it hurts, it'll make us feel better. This may be where your mama comes in. But, again, you're not actually addressing the problem. Make sure that you focus on common interests and long-term goals. So, what is your true overall goal for the two of you? What do you share? Then start creating options before arriving at actual decisions. Again, this can be maybe brainstorming and listing all the options that relate and could work. This can maybe be just a sounding board. And then critically evaluate your solution. Does your decision truly meet both of your needs? For example, if I am trying to plan a trip and I want to go to Vegas and my sister wants to go to the beach, well, if we collaborate, we first have to focus on our common interests. We both really want to go on vacation and get away from work. What are our long-term goals? Relaxation and a nice destination. Then we create options and come to a decision. So maybe we decide, hey, Well, if you really want the beach and I really want Vegas, maybe because I can see some shows, then let's go on a cruise. That way we can get what we both want, and because we're both so happy with that decision, it is collaboration. Now, if we weren't happy completely, and we were only partly happy with it, then that would be more compromise. But you see, even just how we experience, how we perceive, how we handle the conflict can be so very important. Now, when it comes to handling conflict, there are some traditional ways that people view the genders and how they relate to conflict. Traditionally, women are expected to avoid and suppress conflict. Men are expected to use competition or even violence to get their conflict met. Now keep in mind, I do mention traditional because not every single woman is going to avoid and suppress conflict. She may compete, she may even use violence, and men may avoid and suppress conflict. Again, it's going to really depend on people's personal upbringing and how they address conflict. What I've noticed a lot is based on how your parents handle conflict, it's going to be indicative of how you handle conflict. Also, your textbook mentions the demand and withdraw pattern. Now, this pattern has been seen in a heteronormative view as the woman will make a demand and then the man doesn't want to do it, so he withdraws from the conflict. He avoids. But we know that this can happen in any relationship, not just a romantic between a man and a woman. It can happen between a romantic relationship in same-sex couples. It can happen in friendships. It can even happen in families, where one person will make a demand and then the other person in response will just withdraw. When we think about how we handle conflict, our cultures also have a factor into this. We notice that in a lot of collectivistic cultures, cultures that tend to emphasize family and the group as a whole, that you prioritize what the group says over what the individual says or does. In these cultures, there tends to be a lot more emphasis on avoidance and accommodation. In individualistic cultures, like here in the US, where there's a lot of emphasis on the person doing what they want to do, that I'm going to go out and achieve my own goal for my own sake, regardless of what anybody else thinks of me, there tends to be a lot more competition, reactivity, and more collaboration. Regardless of what culture you come from or what culture your conversational partner comes from, remember to adjust. Be mindful of how their gender and their cultural differences can definitely affect how they perceive conflict. So that will conclude part 2. In part 3, we'll be talking about technology and how to handle conflict, as well as some short-term and long-term effects of conflict overall.